Hello, this is Cross and Crown Radio, and I'm Mike Robinson, your host. Welcome to the show. Today, today we're going to be talking about Greg Bahnsen's new book, Against All Opposition. I highly recommend it for the pastor, for the budding philosopher, or one who's getting involved in apologetics. Well, I have all Greg Bahnsen's books, you already say. This has, as you'll see as I go through this real quickly here, this has material that you don't get in other books. I highly recommend this book, Against All Opposition. I don't get any money for recommending it. I'm just glad that Gary DeMar put this out, even though I have all Bahnsen's previous books. I also recommend another book, A History of Western Philosophy and Theology. A History of Western Philosophy and Theology by John Frame. I'll probably cover this in a couple weeks. Now, this book that I'm going to be talking about today, I'm not doing an academic book review. I'm just going to go through it really briefly. And what's great about this book is at the start, because Gary DeMar and his organization put this book out, they really put a lot of energy in getting this. What makes this book worth its price right off the start is Gary DeMar's testimony and how he met Greg Bahnsen. It's very fascinating and very wonderful. I really enjoyed that part. Even though it was a brief biography and testimony of Gary DeMar, it's also really, really good because I had Gary DeMar at our church a couple times in Las Vegas. Very fine Christian man, and has done great work, including releasing this book. He says in the introduction, I and many others were devastated at the news of his untimely death in December of 1995. Who would replace him? Who could replace him? No one has. And I completely agree with that. He put that really well. And that's one reason I wrote a biography on Greg Bahnsen. You can get that on Amazon. It's called Greg Bahnsen, The Man Atheists Feared the Most, by Mike Robinson. But there's a section that's really cool. Facts aren't enough. Okay? So this is obviously, like I said earlier, this is not going to be a rigid academic review. I'm just going to cover it, why you should buy this book, or give you some information. Maybe you don't want to buy this book, but I highly recommend it, and you can do what you want. But facts aren't enough. He covers that. See, for the Christian worldview, as a presupposition, facts are important. Evidence is very, very important. And yet, facts and evidence, they have to have a ground and a foundation to make sense of them. And of course, the Christian worldview, the triune God alone, is that foundation. So that's wonderful. He covers that. And then he talks about another section, faith or reason. He demonstrates that it's not one against the other, but both. And he gives us the reason why. That's also a really powerful element of this book. Then he has a chapter on it's impossible to think without presuppositions. Here's another chapter, just by itself, is worth the price of this book. It's impossible to think without presuppositions. And then he talks about Descartes and what kind of effect he had on epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. And then he talks about doubting everything is for fools. And that's important. That's a really powerful section. Now, he doesn't really cover what I'm about to say, but doubting requires God. Doubting presupposes God. Why? Because when you're doubting, say you're doubting because you read a book by an atheist, or at Thanksgiving you had a very smart brother school you as an atheist, and now you're doubting, or somebody close to you died, and so emotionally you're doubting. Doubting requires God because doubting utilizes and must always use the laws of logic. And only God has the ontology, only God can account for, only God can be the ground for the laws of logic. So even doubting requires God. If you want more on that, you can get my book, Science Requires God, by Mike Robinson. But then he has another section, the war is between faith and faith. In other words, everybody, the most strict atheist, has faith. He has faith not necessarily in God, although he does know God exists. He has faith in many things in his life, and Bahnsen draws that out beautifully. Very powerful section. Then he has a chapter on unbelievers are not neutral and Christians shouldn't be. Another powerful chapter by Greg Bahnsen in this book, Against All Opposition. I highly recommend, even if you have Bahnsen's previous books. The chapter 6 on what is philosophy. Wow, you can study that, read that, and read that. Very, very powerful chapter. Again, that alone should prompt you to buy this book, just that chapter alone. And so I really enjoyed that. It talks about Socrates and other philosophers. Then he goes through a section on metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. He covers that beautifully. Metaphysics in a sense is ontology. They can be interchanged in some ways. That's the term I like to use most because of the New Age ripoff of metaphysics. But he covers that and covers it very, very well. Then he has a chapter on challenging the challenges, of competing worldviews. Challenges of competing worldviews. Very, very well done chapter. So grateful that Gary DeMar put this book out. Gary DeMar came to our church in Las Vegas a couple times. Very fine Christian man, did great work. He does not get enough credit for all the work he's done. I really enjoy Gary DeMar. Then he has a critique on atheism. Many of you will be familiar with that work from his other books, as well as his debates. But it's also, brief, cogent, and powerful. A quick course in comparative religion, chapter 10. A quick course in comparative religion. This is all you need for a comparative religion, because he talks about the foundation and the ground that only the triune God can be that for all reality. And the competing religions don't have the ontology to do that with their false God. Very powerful. You can also get my books on presuppositions, examine Buddhism, presuppositions, examine Hinduism, as well as refuting Allah, proving Jesus, which refutes, of course, Islam. You can get those books by Mike Robinson on Amazon. But this chapter is really all you need. Very, very powerful. Very short, but gets to the point and refutes the other religions very, very well. Then the biblical counterfeit religions he discusses, like, some of the cults and as well as Islam. Again, you can get my book, Presuppositions Examine Mormonism, Presuppositions Examine Jehovah's Witness on Amazon, as well as Refuting Allah, Proving Jesus. But his chapter, very, very powerful. I really highly recommend this book. And his section on empiricism and rationalism, very important, very powerful. Bahnsen did a lot of work on that. And so what I'm about to say draws on that work, as well as Van Til's and other philosophers and apologists and scholars. Because many people say they cannot believe anything unless they see it themselves. This is a form of empiricism. Many hold to empiricism as their worldview. They declare that unless something can be tested with our five senses, it's not true. Of course, the main problem with these type of statements is they cannot be tested by the five senses. Thus, they are self-refuting statements and assertions. The theory self-destructs under its own weight. Another problem surfaces because our senses aren't 100% reliable. They're fairly reliable, but they cannot be perfectly trusted. They cannot be the foundation for your worldview. Augustine pointed out how a straight oar appears bent when it's in the water. Many of us, you drive on a hot day going down the street, and you're on the street and you look ahead and there's a mirage. But once you get to the mirage, there's no water there. Our senses can be deceived. We see dozens and dozens of magicians in the entertainment industry who show us that you cannot necessarily trust your senses. The hand is quicker than the eye. We cannot base our world and life view on our empirical senses. They're important and they need to be utilized, but they cannot be the ground or the foundation. So the notion that all truth is ascertained using the five senses cannot justify 2 + 2 is, notice this, always 4, and that all animals die. Why? Because you cannot see the place where all animals die. You're not omnipresent, so you cannot make that statement unless somebody who knows all things and sees all things has revealed that, and that would be God, as well as 2 + 2 being 4. You don't know. Well, you assume it is. Math tells us it must be, but you don't know that across the world, on the moon, across the galaxy, unless God has shown you to. Of course, we take that for granted. We all know innately that's true, but logically you cannot prove it unless God has revealed it. So our senses are partially reliable and they're important, as well as our rational thought, but both must be built upon the ground and the foundation of the triune God. So numerous people claim that they only believe what they can see. Well, in one way, under their non-Christian worldview, they cannot see any object. Human eyesight cannot give direct or immediate awareness and understanding of any object. Only God can have that. Eyesight can provide information on some aspects and attributes of any given object, but not fully comprehending it. Only God can see all the millions and millions of atoms, and he can fully understand the proton and electrons with exhaustive knowledge. He has exact and exhaustive knowledge of the color, the texture, the size, the weight, the density, and the complete physical makeup of all objects in the universe. No human can have exhaustive and perfect knowledge of any one object anywhere, let alone all the objects. So the senses are basically reliable, but you do not want to build your worldview on it. Many taste test studies have demonstrated that the sense of taste is not always reliable. The Associated Press reported surgical medical teams who have lots of checks and balances and have lawsuits hanging over their heads, yet the Associated Press reported that surgical medical teams leave clamps, sponges, and other tools inside 1,500 patients nationwide each year, just in America. These are highly trained teams with large potential lawsuits looming over them, yet their senses fail them at times. One cannot construct a reliable worldview exclusively on the five senses. Empiricism fails, and we know that. So strict empiricism commits the logical fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc, the notion of empirical verification as a source and basis for epistemology is itself not true by definition, nor can it be empirically verified. Therefore, it cannot be classified as meaningful or valid assertion. A post hoc is a fallacy with the following form. A occurs before B, therefore A is a cause of B. This cannot logically be proven. We know this through the Christian worldview, that we can trust causation and induction, as well as our empirical senses to some degree, if we are basing it upon the foundation and the truth of the Christian worldview. Many others, though, declare they cannot believe anything unless it's based on reason. They try to make the world intelligible through rationalism. Everything must bow to human reason. There are many problems to this. The first one is the question, why? Why? Well, because it's rational. Okay, you're arguing in a circle. Why? The second problem comes to light if they assert that one should base life on rationalism. This forces him to jump over into ethics, which pure rationalism is silent. So why should we, why ought we base our worldview on reason? They cannot answer that. And so I highly recommend this book by Greg Bahnsen. Very important book. Get it. And if you have any other questions or comments, let us know. And if you're out there and you heard Jesus Christ died on the cross for all of our sins, was buried, and God raised him from the dead, right now, if God is touching your heart, I urge you to turn from your ways and come to Christ. And if that's you, if God through his word and spirit is touching your heart by his grace, come to Christ right now, call out to heaven and say, Father, I believe. I believe in Jesus. I believe he is the Son of God and the Son of Man. I believe he died on the cross for all my sins, and God raised him from the dead on the third day. I give him my whole heart, my whole life. I'll follow him all the days that I live. If that's you, make sure that you message us or email us or write us, and we'll send you any 2 free books of the over 40 that I've written. Any 2 that you want, we'll send them to you for free. And if you're a Christian, again, I recommend getting this book. Very powerful book. I think you'll enjoy it. This is Pastor Mike Robinson. Until next time, saying may God richly bless you.